Time now for Your Money. Could the battle over immigration and so-called Islamophobia in this country actually be hurting our economy? Let's talk about immigration. You hear it being debated all the time. Immigrants are taking American jobs. We have too many immigrants, illegal immigrants. Let's dissect this for a second. Joining me now is the author of the book, The Great Reset, Richard Florida. If you want to know a lot about stuff in this economy, read Richard Florida's books. Richard, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being back here. I want to tap into a conversation that you've been having lately. It's in your book, but this idea that our fear of immigration, this growing phobia of immigrants and what appears to be a negative impact on our economy is actually going to make America less competitive in the years ahead. A controversial thesis. Tell me about it.
Well, immigrants have powered our economy since its inception, from the birth of the steel industry with Andrew Carnegie, a Scotsman, to the rise of semiconductors with a guy from Hungary named Andy Grove, to the birth of those Silicon Valley companies, half of which, the Googles, the Yahoos, the companies that power the U.S. economies, were founded by an immigrant, to the fact that half of all of our science and technology PhDs come from foreign countries. The U.S. is a high-tech country in large measure because it's been open to the best and brightest from throughout the world. And closing the door on immigration or even mounting anti-immigrant sentiment is not good for the economy, because people who go out with talent they'll stay home or they'll go elsewhere and start those companies that we need to provide the jobs for Americans.
One of the places that you've talked about them going is where you are right now. You're in Toronto, and you've talked about the fact that Canada, and listen, let's not sugarcoat it. It's not that everybody in Canada thinks that there are no issues with immigration, but Canada has developed a different view of immigrants that you argue is more welcoming.
Well, I just looked at the data. You know, people are yelling and screaming about this in Arizona, and 15% of the workforce, of the population, is immigrants. In the United States, the city with the highest percentage of immigrants is Miami. It's about 35%. In Toronto or Vancouver, virtually half the people are immigrants, or what we call in Canada new Canadians. And I think, yeah, there are problems here in Canada, but the problem is, should the immigrant who's driving a cab but has a degree in dentistry or law or healthcare, should they be able to use their skills fully and build the economy? And I'll tell you what's really interesting. Over in Vancouver, which has an equal percentage of immigrants, been attracting immigrants from Asia over the past 20 years, when Microsoft had to build a new laboratory, it said, we can't get the skilled people in the Seattle area. They put that new lab in Vancouver, not because the people they needed were in Vancouver, because they could bring people from Asia, from India, from Europe, get them the visas and the work permits they need, and put them to work making that high-tech software. Jobs that should have been or could have been in Seattle ended up in Vancouver as a result of restrictions on immigrants in the U.S. It's not a good thing for the U.S. economy.
All right, I want to tap into that when we come back. What exactly is the U.S. losing out on? What can they lose out on specifically because of what might be an anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States? Richard, stay right there. I'll be right back with you. More from Richard Florida after the break. You know, I follow so much of Richard's stuff and I read so much of it that I assume people know about Richard Florida. Some may not, though. Let me just tell you, he's a professor of business in Toronto right now at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. He's been a professor at George Mason University, Carnegie Mellon. He's been a visiting professor at Harvard and MIT. He's got his PhD from Columbia University. And your book, Richard, your latest book, is sort of a way to live and work in this post-crash environment. The thing about you is you're data-driven, so you don't tend to get caught up in all of the emotional discussion. There is a very emotional discussion going on in America, which may or may not be tied to the type of sentiment we have about immigrants, and it is the growing sentiment we have about Muslims in America. Do you foresee in your data-driven world evidence that that hurts us in any way?
I think so. I think what I found is when there's prejudice or discrimination or a backlash against any ethnic group or immigrant group, it chills the climate for immigrants to come to the United States. And I think that climate has been chilling now ever since 9/11. So what I'm finding is a lot of talented people who would have come to the United States from India, from China, are deciding to stay home, or they're going where they're being welcome, whether that's Australia or New Zealand, or they're coming up to Toronto or Vancouver where they feel more welcome. So I think and also with these times of crises, what I call these great resets, these are times when the global flow of ambitious people shifts. one of the things that really benefited the United States in the last crisis, the 1930s, we attracted all of the Jewish, European Jewish Americans who helped build our technology industries, the people like Albert Einstein, or also Europeans like Fritz Lang, who helped build our Hollywood industry. So this is the worst time to have an anti-Islamic sentiment or anti-immigrant sentiment in general, because it's going to hurt the economy at the time we need job creation most.
Richard, we can talk for hours. Hopefully you'll come back and we'll continue this conversation because it's an important one. Richard Florida, an author and professor and the author of The Great Reset, which is a great book for everybody to read. Richard, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Ali. It's great being with you again.
All right, talk about great ideas. How about an electric car that goes 307 miles an hour? I don't know why you